Hey, I would like to start off by saying that I absolutely love this subreddit. This is my first post ever, so I'm so sorry if it's long. I was really inspired to share my story here after seeing so many similar ones, even if mine in no way compares to what happens to some. I'll first give a little backstory to my living situation. I was about 10, possibly 11, when my mom found a job working as a live-in manager to a quaint little motel at the end of my town. She took the job, we packed up, and left my childhood home. When we first moved in, it was a disaster. Holes everywhere. Certain parts of the house smelled horrible. We later learned this was because the old manager, Steve, was a druggie and his wife was making and dealing meth out of there. A couple months into living there, we had sort of fixed up the place and made it livable. At this point, my mom was working full-time at the desk. We had mostly stayed towards the back of the house because of the odd setup. The way the front desk where you check in is laid out was basically in our living room. It was a tiny, cramped room with just the desk on the side and a door on the other, which led to our living room. A lot, and I mean a lot of people decided to just open the door whenever they pleased and often got a view of whatever video game my brother and I were playing. This as a kid already freaked me out, and because of the motel's past, many meth heads came by looking for Steve, and would walk right in when they didn't believe me and my mom when she said that they didn't work or live here any longer. One time during summer break, a year or two after we moved in, I decided to stay up all night and play video games. I made a little nest in the living room and made myself comfy. It was around 1 in the morning after hours of Skyrim when I started to hear weird noises. Usually if my mom knew a regular would be late, she would leave a key in an envelope for them, which, looking back, doesn't seem smart at all. I hear talking. It sounded like two men speaking a different language. I figured that's what they were doing and would leave in a second, but they never did. The talking continued for 10 minutes before I started to hear them pull on the door. First it was gentle, as if they were testing it. As they continued, it seemed to get more frantic, and I could almost hear grunting. Soon, it was full-on banging on the door. I was confident that my parents would hear it, but their room was all the way in the back of the house, which was about 3 hallways down. So after a minute, I figured I was screwed and was probably going to die. I was a super paranoid kid. The banging stopped, and after a few seconds, I started to hear tapping at the window behind the desk in the house. I saw clearly a head from behind the curtain. The windows were high up, and he looked to be stretching up to get it. He started to yank on the window, trying to break it open. When he was doing this, I saw movement at the screen door in the kitchen. At this point, I was absolutely shitting myself. I was petrified. I'm guessing the guy who was at the desk door had now circled around to the screen door while his buddy was prying at the window. He jiggled the doorknob back and forth, and after a second resuming what he was doing earlier, and now banging on that door full force. For some reason, through my fear, I decided to try and be a ninja. To up my sneak level, of course, and army crawl into the little office part connected to the desk. There was a key drop-off where people could just shove their keys into when they checked out that was basically just a hole in the wall. I popped up, all while they were still banging on the door, and grabbed a pencil to lift up the flap. I don't know what I expected to see. They were clearly at the side of the house, but I just had a horrible feeling, like I was being surrounded. Turns out I was right. When I lifted it, I saw 2 more men standing at the door, hands in their pockets. I immediately closed it and almost cried. During this, I failed to notice the hallway light turn on and my parents emerged, looking very distraught. As soon as my dad turned on the kitchen light and shouted, "What the fuck?" all the noise stopped and the guys took off running. I could hear one of them shout something and then nothing, just complete silence. After I told my parents what happened the best I could through hysterics, they called the police. The police showed up about an hour later and took the report. It didn't seem like this happened to anyone else in the town, but they seemed to think it was some Mexican workers who came up for the hops farms and maybe didn't understand that we were closed. I don't know. It seems like they were just kind of race blaming, but I never really got an explanation of that night. All I know is that they didn't seem friendly, and I don't know what they would have done if they got in. So, to those 4 mystery men outside my house, let's not meet. I'm an 18-year-old female and just started a job at a hotel a little over a month ago as a housekeeper. The hotel is located in the very rural Midwest. Not a super busy hotel, except for the occasional family reunions checking in and the few workers passing through the state. Many of the people who come through are older, 40s, 50s, and upwards. When I first started, my parents had told me to be careful because the hotel was sketchy. I never really found it to be sketchy, or the people passing through to be, until one day about 2 weeks ago. I had just clocked in around 10:30 and headed down to the end of the hall opposite of where the lobby was to start on my stayovers, the rooms where people stayed more than one night. At the end of the hall, there were 4 rooms tucked into almost a corner, I want to say. You can't really see the doors to these rooms until you reach the end of the hallway. There's 2 rooms on one side, 2 on the other. I was grabbing all the supplies I needed to do the stayover when a man, another stayover, came out of one of the 4 rooms and asked how to work the coffee machine. He was about 3 times the size of me, 6'3", around 300 pounds, whereas I am 5'3" and about 125. Didn't seem like a big deal or weird. I'm pretty friendly and outgoing and can make a little small talk. I went back to cleaning the other room and minding my business when he comes out again to tell me that his room didn't need attending to. I figured so and was glad that there was another room I could check off my list. My manager had come down the hall to strip a room that had checked out, and I turned down the hall to go strip another room when the man came out of his room again. I assume he had another question about something in the room, so I turned around to speak to him. He asked,
"Aren't you scared to do your job?"
And I replied, "No, not really, since I rarely ever have any interaction with guests as a housekeeper." He then went on to say that I was awfully pretty and I needed mace or a weapon to protect myself, and I showed him my car keys that I kept in my pocket for that exact reason. The conversation at first wasn't really off-putting, but when I realized what he was getting at, my body flooded with anxiety. He then said,
"I don't think the car keys are enough. You're small and could get easily snatched up."
And in that moment, I went into the room my manager was in across the hall and waited for him to go back into his room before continuing my job as normal as possible. That experience really shook me up, and I sat in another room down the hall for about an hour, crying and having an anxiety attack because I thought this man would try to find me in whatever room I was in and kidnap me. To the man who stayed in room 131 a few weeks ago, let's not meet. In late 2020, I was working at a chain hotel off the interstate. I won't say which hotel, but it is the major brand. I was training a coworker for the night audit shift. She and I are both female mid-20s. Around 3 a.m., after all the paperwork for the day was done, I decided to show her the different room types, starting with the largest suite up on the 3rd floor. Upon arriving on the 3rd floor, we got off the elevator, started walking down the hall, and noticed a man who was sweating profusely just standing in the doorway of his room. He definitely seemed intoxicated at the least. We walked by him, greeting him, as one does, and get no response. The fear was suddenly palpable. We went to get to the suite I'm showing her, and as soon as the door shuts, I say that the guy is giving me a weird vibe. I don't think we should walk past him again to get to the elevator and suggest that we instead continue down the hall to the stairs. As soon as we exit the room, we immediately notice the man is not only back in his room, but facing us and watching us. I whisper to her, "Girl, take your shoes off. We're gonna run down the steps and out to the parking lot, okay?" She agrees, and we take our shoes off at the top of the stairwell and bolt down the steps and out to the parking lot. We enter back into the building and run into the office and check the cameras. Sure enough, that man had followed us down the steps and was now looking for us in the hallway and by the door to the parking lot. We check the reservation tied to the room number so I can inform my manager and tell them to place the person on the do not rent list. All I remember was that his name was extraordinarily normal, so unforgettable it could have been John Smith. Jump forward to late 2021, and I turn on the local news and see this man who followed us down the steps that night. His name was Anthony Robinson, now dubbed the Shopping Cart Killer, who killed 2 women in Harrisonburg and 2 more that we know of in northern VA. He is known to have utilized hotels to meet and victimize women that he was communicating with online. This was my only close encounter, and definitely creepy in hindsight.